Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri fantasyart.com. I'm just going to show you guys a quick preview before we start today. So as you can see today, I actually am doing something a little bit different with my character. I did call this character Voodoo Prince, so it was very loosely based off what my knowledge of voodoo is. Now I have very little knowledge, so it's not even accurate. It's just a name that reflects some of the character traits and items that the character is holding. I actually roughed out the pose as I was working on something else, and I decided I actually liked it. So I decided to keep the pose, because it did portray a lot of character to this character. As you can see, the character is holding a doll too. Later on, it'll fit a little bit more with that theme that I was telling you about. You can see that I'm not actually going into too much detail for the background. I'm actually using a slightly different method than what you see me use in the past. This one's much looser overall when I was figuring out the background. And the reason for that is I actually have this video actually ties into the next video. So in this video, at the end of the video, you'll actually get to choose which thumbnail out for my next illustration. Now I'm still fine-tuning some of the details for that. So over the course of maybe a couple videos, you'll see how I might change how people go about actually voting for those thumbnails, just because it is something that's new. I haven't done this before. So I've included also speed painting videos on those thumbnails as well. I won't be doing that in the future. The simple reason is it's way too time consuming. It takes about between 2 to 3 hours for me to put one video together, so times 3, that's a long day, especially with my regular video updates. So for this week though, you can actually watch the speed painting for that thumbnail. Future videos will be a lot quicker, but I may include later on some additional animation, maybe. I'm still debating, I'm still playing around with some of the softwares that I actually have to see if I can actually be able to do that. So in the future, if this works out, then I'll probably have quite a few options, or it'll probably become a regular thing. But right now it's just a test run, so I'm still fine-tuning the process overall for that. Now, as you can see, for the character, I barely did any roughing out for the background. I did some really basic roughing out for the background. The reason why is because I already had an idea of what I was going to do for this character. I did want to have this character in rags, partially in rags, so that it shows that he hasn't kept himself up to date with clothing or item, because he just doesn't have access to that. I want this character to have learnt these skills as a result of his circumstances. So he's stuck in this area. So he almost had to learn that skill set on his own just in order to survive. Now, it is a magical doll, so it's not like an actual traditional voodoo doll. It's more of he found this item and he was able to learn how to properly use it for his own benefit. It's not in a good way, mind you, but he did learn how to do that. So there's a lot of thought that went into this character, and I had been playing around with that idea for a while, but I didn't have any idea of the overall design for the character, what I was going to do, how I was going to portray him. But that day, because I was just sketching digitally, I actually came across the one thumbnail that I actually like, so I fully rendered it out. I'm like, okay, that's the thumbnail I'm going to use. So some of these illustrations are not always planned out. The character idea behind the characters are planned out, however, in most cases. I do have, although I don't tell you guys about the backstory, I do try to figure out a rough backstory at least, just because it helps me actually convey that personality trait into the character when I'm actually fully rendering out the illustration. It's very important. Most really good artists, they try to get a pretty good understanding of what is the character's personality when they're actually drawing an illustration. It's important because it really helps make the overall piece read better if you can do that. So for this reason, I did figure out a really rough backstory, and I am in the works of possibly, at least in rough stages, working on a story and possibly doing a video comic. It's still up in the air. It's probably going to take a while because that is extremely time consuming to do, and I do have to figure this out on my own. So I'm probably going to use Flash or something, so it's going to be a different style than what you normally see me draw in. So that's probably not going to happen for at least a couple months, but I have started roughing out a story. Can't tell you any more than that, but there's actually a lot coming up that I'm trying to include on my YouTube feeds for the future, at least. Now, for the hand, when I was working out the hand pose, I was actually posing that my own hand in that position to try and figure out how to convey that emotion in that hand. It's very important whenever you're drawing any piece that you take a lot of time with the hands, because they do play a very important role. The whole body plays a really important role on the character's emotional state and how it's conveyed to the audience. So for this reason, I do take quite a bit of time and treat certain individual aspects as actually individual pieces. So I treat the hands as individual characters almost compared to the body. And then the face is another individual character. And you have to do that, because if you don't do that, then the emotion doesn't read properly in your illustration. And you do want the emotion to read, because if it doesn't read, then people don't know what's going on in your drawing. If they don't know what's going on, then they have a problem connecting with the drawing. And you do want your audience to actually connect to your drawing, because that makes them coming back for more, because they really enjoyed the piece. They connected with that piece. So as you can see right now, I'm actually adding the pins in his hat. Now the crown he's wearing is actually helping him control the doll. So it's part of an old civilization, which is why it doesn't have all the jewelry or anything like that. It's very simplistic in its design, but it allows him to control the doll essentially to do what he wants it to do. Now, I wasn't too sure about the leg, which is why I was playing around with the leg size there, because I wasn't sure if the perspective was entirely correct, so I did play around with it, but I liked the original drawing, or the original size more, so I just left it. Now, as you can see now, I'm actually trying to figure out the actual structure of the trees, the proper perspective, the branches, the roots. And all I'm doing is I'm actually using the soft brush, so I'm not using any special brushes of any sort. And I'm playing with the shadows essentially when I'm trying to figure it out. Because that's really important, because I want the shadows and the level of detail to match my characters. So I do need to take quite a bit of time making sure that the level of detail is similar to at least my character. Now, as you go further away, however, because you can see that the background is still very faded and actually pretty much stays the same. I don't really modify the background too much after that initial stage. It's because it's so far in the background, it doesn't require very much detail. You only have to hint at detail. And because of that, I don't spend too much time on the background elements as long as there's a really good silhouette. So it has to have very strong individual silhouettes. And then once that's done, then I just move on to the midground and the foreground elements, because those are the most important parts, because they help tie the entire piece together. they help reinforce the idea that there is perspective, there is structure. Because the closer those items are, the more detail they need, the more crisp some of the lines will be. So for that reason, they need to match the character the most. So I do spend a lot more time on those elements just because they are so close, so you would see so much detail. Just figuring out the perspective, that one root. Generally those types of roots are actually pretty hard for me to do because it does take a while to figure out the exact perspective that you want on that root. Now that larger tree, it is closer to the character, so because it is closer to the character, I need really close to the same amount of detail that's in the character in that tree. If I don't do that, then it seems like the character was like copied and pasted into the scene, and I want to avoid that. So for that reason, I do have to add a lot more detail to it. I need to crispen some of the lines, and you'll see me doing that fairly shortly as well. So I added some of those bushes in front because they do help break up the silhouette a little bit more in that area. They do add some more interest because I don't want it repetitive either. And what I realized too is that my character was just too large for the scene, so if I do decide to print this character, it's problematic because the character is too large, so portions of the body would be cut. And also the character shouldn't be the same size as a tree. Generally people aren't the same size, so I did make the character a little bit smaller, which is why I work on the character on a separate layer. It's because it does allow me so much more flexibility when I'm actually trying to resize everything. So I'm just crisping up some of those lines and highlights in the tree just to make sure that it's the same level of detail as the character, as you can see. So I've just added a flat color layer. This allows me to get my initial palette in place, and once I've done that, then I start adding basic shadows, basic colors. This is where I'm actually figuring out the full color palette for my character. Now there is a lot of greenery, so there would be a lot of reflected light, especially on the character later on. So I do start adding right here actually some of those that green bounce light that you would normally see. Because the character already has a lot of brown on him, I don't need to add the brown colors as a bounce light. But the green, because it does have a lot more contrast, it's also a cool color. I decided to add that as the main bounce light color. Now I noticed that the bush didn't have enough detail in comparison to some of the mid-ground elements, so I had to go in afterwards and just add a little bit more detail so that it looked like it was in the foreground. Because that bush is in front of the character, and because it is in front of the character, it needs to have that extra detail. I'm just adding some more bounce light to the character, making sure that all the details still read correctly. Okay, so this is the finished piece. Now, like I said, I do have the thumbnails that are coming up shortly. As you can see, I did try to illustrate the fact that the power is coming from the doll. It's something he's discovered, so he's learned how to use this to his own benefit. What you're going to see next is 3 thumbnails. You guys actually get to choose which thumbnail I'm going to fully render out for the next video. In each of these, you're actually going to get an additional description telling you how to actually properly vote. So that's it for today's video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.